Ethan Grant was a man the world admired. He wasn't born rich, but through hard work, clever ideas, and a fearless attitude, he built an empire worth billions. His name appeared in magazines, newspapers, and business shows. People called him the man with the golden touch because every company he invested in turned into a success story. He lived in a grand mansion on top of a hill, surrounded by luxury cars, art pieces, and people who always said yes to him. But what no one saw was that behind all his fame and fortune, Ethan was slowly losing touch with reality. He had become too confident, maybe even arrogant. Years of success had made him believe that he could never fail. He thought he knew everything about money, risk, and business. His team of advisors often tried to warn him about risky moves, but Ethan rarely listened. If he wanted something, he got it, no questions asked. One day, a new business proposal arrived on his desk. It was from a young tech company that promised to revolutionize the future of communication. They claimed they had discovered a technology that would replace traditional social media platforms. Their presentation was flashy and full of numbers that looked exciting. They said that if Ethan invested $300 million now, the company would be worth 10 times that amount within a year. Ethan's eyes lit up. The idea of another huge success was too tempting to resist. His advisors were not so sure. One of them, Mr. Cole, nervously told him, "Sir, their data looks inflated. They're showing growth numbers that don't match the market trends." But Ethan waved his hand and said confidently, "Cole, I've been in business longer than these analysts have been alive. I know a winning project when I see one." What Ethan didn't realize was that his pride was slowly blinding him. He was so used to winning that he had stopped listening to reason. He spent hours in his glass-walled office, going through charts and figures, convincing himself that he was right. Every time he looked at the company's promotional materials, he saw only what he wanted to see: huge profits and global success. At night, he sat by the giant window of his mansion, staring at the city lights below. To him, those lights were like his achievements, shining bright, untouchable. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. He was ignoring small details, little warnings that told him to slow down. But he pushed the thoughts away. Doubt, he thought, is for the weak. I didn't become a billionaire by doubting myself. The next morning, Ethan called a meeting with his board members. He stood at the head of the long wooden table and said proudly, "We're investing $300 million into Nextech. This company is the future, and I want us to lead that future." The room fell silent. No one dared to disagree. Over the years, Ethan had become intimidating. If anyone questioned him, he would simply replace them. So, even though most of the people in the room felt uneasy, they stayed quiet. After the meeting, Ethan leaned back in his chair, smiling. He felt powerful, unstoppable. He imagined headlines praising his decision. "Ethan Grant does it again. The billionaire who never misses." That's what he wanted people to read. But what he didn't realize was that pride can be the biggest enemy of success. That evening, he walked through the halls of his mansion. The staff bowed slightly as he passed by, always careful not to make eye contact for too long. Everyone respected him, but no one really spoke to him. It was a lonely kind of power. The only person who had the courage to speak her mind was Maria, his maid who had been with him for over a decade. She treated him with respect, but she wasn't afraid to tell him if something seemed wrong, at least when it came to simple things around the house. Maria often told her daughter, Lila, stories about Mr. Grant, how he worked endlessly, how success had changed him, and how he sometimes looked sad even when surrounded by everything money could buy. Lila admired the man she had heard so much about. To her, Ethan Grant was like a living legend. She never imagined that one day, she would meet him face to face, or that her words would change his life forever. For now, though, Ethan believed he had made the best decision of his career. He couldn't wait to see the results. He spent the next few days planning press conferences, sending invitations to investors, and dreaming of the moment he would once again be called a genius. But behind all the glamour and confidence, a storm was quietly forming. A storm that Ethan could not see coming. The numbers on his screen looked perfect. The graphs went up, the projections looked strong, and everything seemed to align with his expectations. Yet something was missing, a small but vital piece of truth that no one dared to mention. And fate, in its mysterious way, was about to send someone completely unexpected to open his eyes. Not a business expert, not a banker, not a CEO, but a young woman whose voice would echo louder than all his advisors combined. That was the beginning of a story no one in the billionaire world would ever forget. The moment when a maid's daughter would change the fate of a man who thought he could never be wrong. Maria had worked for Ethan Grant for more than 10 years. She was one of the few people in his mansion who had seen him change from a hardworking, kind man into a proud billionaire who rarely smiled. She didn't know much about his business world, but she could see how lonely he had become. He spent long hours in his office, surrounded by documents and computer screens, and sometimes even forgot to eat. Maria respected him deeply, but she often wished he would slow down and talk to people like he used to. One morning, Maria received a call from the housekeeping manager. 2 of the regular maids were sick, and there was too much work for her to handle alone. She immediately thought of her daughter, Lila, who was home from university. Lila had just finished her degree in finance and was waiting for job interviews. "Would you mind helping me for a day at Mr. Grant's mansion?" Maria asked. "It's just for cleaning and arranging things." Lila hesitated at first. "Mom, I've never worked in a billionaire's house before," she said nervously. "What if I do something wrong?" Maria smiled. "Just be polite, stay quiet, and do what you're told. Mr. Grant may look serious, but he's a good man." The next morning, Lila arrived with her mother. She was amazed the moment she stepped into the mansion. The tall glass walls, shiny marble floors, and huge chandeliers made her feel like she had entered another world. Every corner looked perfect, every object seemed expensive, and the quietness of the place made her footsteps echo. She followed her mother through the long hallway, carrying a basket of cleaning supplies. As they walked past the main office, Lila slowed down. The large glass door was slightly open. Inside, she saw Mr. Grant sitting at a huge wooden desk, typing on his laptop. The walls were covered with charts, investment reports, and colorful graphs. Papers were spread out everywhere. She could tell he was deep in thought. Lila had always been fascinated by numbers and business. Even though she was just helping her mother that day, her eyes couldn't help but notice the financial charts pinned on the wall. One of them showed a company name she recognized, Nextech Global. She remembered reading about it in a business blog recently. The blog had questioned the company's sudden rise and said their user statistics didn't match their real numbers. Curious, she looked a little closer. The graph showed skyrocketing profits, but something didn't add up. The curve looked too perfect, unrealistically smooth. "That's not possible," she whispered under her breath. Maria noticed her daughter staring and quickly pulled her aside. "Lila, don't look too long. That's Mr. Grant's private work." "Sorry, Mom," Lila replied softly, but the image of those numbers stayed in her mind. Later that afternoon, Lila helped arrange books and files in Ethan's library. She noticed more papers, reports, and contracts related to Nextech. One paper caught her eye. It listed the company's revenue sources, but a section labeled Ad Income seemed off. The numbers were unusually high compared to the company's actual user base. Lila's finance training told her immediately that the data didn't make sense. As she placed the papers neatly on the shelf, Ethan suddenly entered the room. She quickly stood up straight, her heart racing. He looked at her with his usual calm but serious expression. "You're Maria's daughter?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just helping my mother today." He nodded slightly. "Good. Be careful with those papers. They're important." Then he walked past her and began speaking on his phone. Lila couldn't help but overhear his conversation. "Yes, I'm confident," Ethan said firmly. $300 million, final decision. This company is going to change the future. Her stomach tightened. 300 million. That was the investment amount she had seen on the chart earlier. She wanted to say something, to warn him, but how could she? She was just a maid's daughter. Who would believe her? That evening, while helping her mother clean the dining room, Lila couldn't focus. The same thought kept repeating in her mind. He's making a mistake. He's investing in a company that's lying about their numbers. She imagined what could happen if he lost all that money. The layoffs, the damage, the people who would suffer. But still, she told herself, it's none of my business. He's a billionaire. He won't listen to someone like me. When the work was done, Maria and Lila went to the kitchen to collect their things. Mr. Grant walked in, still on his phone, talking loudly about business meetings and future profits. Lila looked at him for a second. He seemed so sure of himself, so confident. But she could sense that something wasn't right. Before she could stop herself, the words escaped her mouth quietly but firmly. Sir, may I say something? Ethan paused, surprised. He had never heard a maid or anyone from his staff interrupt him before. He looked at her curiously. What is it? Lila swallowed nervously. I don't mean to overstep, sir, but the company you're investing in, their numbers don't look real. Their growth seems too fast to be true. I've studied cases like this before. I think you might lose everything if you go through with it. The room fell silent. Maria froze, terrified her daughter had just ruined her job. Ethan stared at Lila, his eyebrows raised, unsure whether to laugh or get angry. No one had ever spoken to him like that, especially not the daughter of his maid. Finally, he gave a small, half-amused smile. You think you understand billion-dollar deals better than me? He said in a calm but sharp tone. Lila didn't answer. She just looked down, feeling her cheeks burn. Ethan shook his head slightly and walked away, saying, Stick to cleaning, young lady. Leave business to the businessmen. Lila said nothing. She helped her mother pack up and left quietly. But as they drove home that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She had spoken the truth, and even though he didn't believe her, those few words would soon change both of their lives forever. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her head. The way Ethan Grant looked at her. The way his voice had turned sharp when he said, Leave business to the businessmen. She hadn't meant to offend him. She had only wanted to help. But now, she was sure her mother would be angry and might even lose her job. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself, Maybe I should have stayed quiet. At the mansion, Ethan was also wide awake. He sat in his home office, surrounded by dim light, staring at the same reports Lila had noticed earlier. Her words echoed in his mind, clear and steady. Their numbers don't look real. You might lose everything. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Why was he even thinking about what a maid's daughter had said? She wasn't an expert. She didn't work in finance. And yet, something about the way she spoke, calm, honest, without fear, made him uneasy. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and leaned back in his chair. She's just a kid, he muttered, trying to shake it off. What could she possibly know? But his confidence wasn't as strong as it had been that morning. For the first time in years, doubt crept into his thoughts. The next morning, Maria came to work early. She was nervous, unsure if Mr. Grant would be angry about Lila's boldness. She found him sitting silently at the breakfast table, reading something on his tablet. She greeted him softly. Good morning, sir. He looked up and nodded. Maria, he said after a pause. Your daughter is quite outspoken. Maria froze, unsure if that was good or bad. I'm so sorry, sir. She didn't mean any disrespect. She just... Ethan raised his hand gently. Relax. I'm not upset. She just surprised me. That's all. Then he gave a small smile and went back to reading. But Maria noticed he wasn't as cheerful or confident as usual. Something had changed. Later that day, Ethan attended a meeting with his financial team. They presented new updates on the Nextech deal. Glowing numbers, strong graphs, and positive projections. Everyone seemed excited. But for some reason, Ethan wasn't. The more they talked, the more uneasy he felt. Lila's words came back again. Their growth seems too fast to be true. He interrupted his advisor mid-sentence. Wait, he said slowly. Have we verified these numbers independently? The room went silent. His team exchanged awkward glances. Finally, one of them spoke up. Not yet, sir. But the company's audit reports look authentic. Everything seems legitimate. Ethan tapped his fingers on the table. Seems legitimate, he repeated softly. It wasn't enough for him. For years, he had trusted his instincts, and they had made him rich. But this time, his instinct felt divided between pride and suspicion. That evening, when everyone left, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at the investment proposal. He opened the company's public reports online, scrolling through pages of data. At first, everything looked fine, but as he read more carefully, he noticed small inconsistencies. Numbers that didn't quite line up, phrases that seemed vague. Maybe that girl wasn't so wrong after all. Still, he didn't want to admit it. How could he tell anyone that a billionaire like him was second-guessing himself because of a maid's daughter's opinion? It sounded ridiculous. He laughed quietly to himself, but the laugh faded quickly. Meanwhile, at home, Lila sat with her mother, who was still worried. "Lila, you should have stayed quiet," Maria said gently. "Mr. Grant could have been angry." "I know, Mom," Lila sighed, "but I couldn't help it. He's about to lose so much money. The company is a scam. I've read about it before. Their data looks fake." Maria shook her head. "Even if you're right, people like him don't listen to people like us. That's just how the world works." Lila lowered her gaze. "Maybe, but I had to try." The next day, Ethan was in a rush. He was preparing for the final signing meeting with Nextdeca's CEO. His car waited outside, and his assistant handed him the documents. But just before he stepped out, he looked at the papers one more time. His mind flashed with Lila's nervous but determined face, her trembling voice saying, "You might lose everything." He hesitated. Something inside him whispered, "Check again." So instead of going straight to the meeting, he called one of his trusted auditors, a quiet, detail-obsessed man named Raymond. "Ray," he said firmly, "I want a deep background check on Nextdec. No assumptions, no shortcuts. I need the truth." Raymond sounded surprised. "Sir, that'll take a couple of days. The deal closes this afternoon." "Then cancel the meeting," Ethan said. "If they can't wait 2 days, they're hiding something." Hours later, Ethan received a call from Nextdeca's CEO, furious about the delay. "Mr. Grant, are you questioning our integrity?" The man snapped. Ethan simply replied, "I'm questioning numbers that don't make sense." Then he hung up. That night, while reviewing reports, Ethan realized how close he had come to risking everything. He didn't know for sure yet, but his gut told him Lila had seen something everyone else missed. For the first time in years, he felt humbled, not by failure, but by truth. In another part of the city, Lila sat by the window watching the rain. She didn't know that her few brave words had already started to change the course of a billionaire's life. She had no idea that the man who once laughed at her warning was now questioning everything because of her honesty. Sometimes, it takes just one small voice to make a powerful man stop and think. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that voice, quiet, sincere, and fearless, was about to save him from losing not only his fortune but also the last bit of wisdom he had left. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, but Ethan Grant's mood was far from bright. He had barely slept. His mind kept spinning between doubt and pride. On one side, there was that quiet voice, Lila's warning, reminding him that something was wrong with the company he was about to invest in. On the other side, his ego whispered, "You're a billionaire. You don't take advice from maids or their daughters." He tried to shake it off as he walked into his office. The walls of glass reflected his image, a confident, successful man in a tailored suit. But for the first time, he didn't feel like the powerful billionaire everyone saw. He felt uncertain, and that was something he wasn't used to. His assistant, Claire, entered with a bright smile and said, "Sir, the Nextdec team has confirmed the final meeting for 2 p.m. today." Ethan nodded, pretending to be focused. "Good. Prepare the documents." Once she left, he leaned back in his chair and looked around his office. The large screens on the wall still showed Nextdeca's glowing reports and charts. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. He stared at the lines of numbers, and again, something inside him whispered, "It doesn't make sense." At noon, the board members arrived. The room was filled with polished shoes, expensive suits, and confident smiles. Everyone congratulated Ethan in advance, calling him a visionary investor and a genius for spotting the next big thing. Their flattery should have made him feel proud, but instead, it made him uncomfortable. When the meeting began, one of his senior advisors, Mr. Cole, cautiously said, "Sir, before we finalize this, I think we should double-check the financial transparency of Nextech. I'm still not completely sure about their data sources." Ethan looked at him. Normally, he would have cut him off and told him not to question his judgment. But today he stayed silent for a moment. Then, with a heavy voice, he said, "Cole, are you suggesting we delay the investment?" Cole hesitated. "I'm suggesting we confirm everything one last time. Sometimes numbers can be misleading." Ethan glanced down at the papers. The same line of doubt appeared in his mind. But then his pride took over again. If I back off now, he thought, people will say I lost my edge. He couldn't bear that. He had built his reputation on always being right, on being bold when others were scared. So he forced a smile and said, "No need for another check. I trust my instincts. This deal is solid." The advisors nodded. No one dared to argue. At 2 p.m., the Nextech representatives arrived. They were young, charming, and full of enthusiasm. Their CEO, a man in his early 30s, shook Ethan's hand confidently. "Mr. Grant, you're making the smartest move of your career. Together, we'll reshape the tech world." Ethan smiled politely. Cameras flashed as they prepared for the official signing. His PR team wanted photos for the media, another success story for the billionaire. As the cameras clicked, Ethan held the pen in his hand. For a split second, he froze. In his mind, he heard Lila's voice again. "You might lose everything." His fingers tightened around the pen. The room was silent, waiting for him to sign. Everyone expected the confident Ethan Grant to move without hesitation. But his heart was pounding. He felt like two people, one shouting, "Sign it," and another whispering, "Stop." Finally, he signed the papers. The Nextech team smiled broadly, shaking hands and thanking him. Everyone clapped. The deal was done. But Ethan didn't feel the excitement he used to feel after a big decision. Instead, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. That evening, as he sat alone in his living room, the laughter from the press conference still echoed in his mind. He turned on the TV and saw himself on the news. Ethan Grant invests $300 million in Nextech Global. The headline read. The anchors called it a bold and brilliant move. He should have felt proud, but instead he felt uneasy. Maria came quietly to the living room to bring him his evening tea. "Sir, your tea," she said softly. Ethan nodded, not taking his eyes off the screen. After a moment, he asked, "Maria, your daughter. What's her name again?" Maria looked surprised. "Lila, sir. She's a bright girl," he said thoughtfully. "Too bold, maybe, but bright." Maria smiled shyly. "She's always been like that. She loves numbers. Even as a child, she would question the prices in the grocery store." Ethan chuckled softly but didn't respond. After she left, he sat back, staring into space. He didn't want to admit it, but that young woman had made him think more deeply than any of his high-paid advisors ever had. A few days passed. Ethan threw himself into work, trying to ignore his discomfort. The media was celebrating his decision. Investors were excited, and his company's stock even rose slightly. Everything seemed fine on the surface. But one night, his chief analyst called him urgently. "Sir, there's something strange in Nextech's recent reports. Some of their user statistics were copied from another company's data sheets." Ethan's heart dropped. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I double-checked. It looks like they faked their growth numbers." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. His mind flashed back to Lila's calm but firm words. She had been right. All of it. He hung up the phone and sat in silence. The empire he had built with years of smart decisions was now at risk because of one careless, prideful move. He realized how dangerous his arrogance had become. The truth hit him harder than any loss ever could. He had ignored the only person brave enough to tell him the truth. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt not powerful, not proud, but humbled. He whispered to himself, "She saw it before anyone else, and I didn't listen." It was the beginning of his downfall, and the first crack in the wall of pride he had built around himself. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would soon push him to do something no billionaire had ever done before, to go looking for the maid's daughter who had tried to save him. Ethan sat in his office late at night, staring at the computer screen as the numbers kept changing. For years, those numbers had been his comfort, his language, his world. But now they looked like warning signs flashing in red. The reports from Nextech were finally revealing the truth. The company he had trusted with $300 million was collapsing from the inside. It started with whispers in the media. A few journalists had begun questioning Nextech's sudden growth. Then came the news that one of their senior developers had leaked confidential documents showing that the company's user data was fake. Within hours, the story exploded everywhere. TV channels, online news, social media. Everyone was talking about it. "Billionaire Ethan Grant's risky investment under fire," read one headline. "Was Nextech a scam?" said another. Ethan watched it all in disbelief. His stomach felt heavy, his throat dry. For a man who had built his entire image around success and smart decisions, this was humiliating. His phone didn't stop ringing. Advisors, journalists, investors, everyone wanted answers. His PR manager begged him to release a statement, but Ethan couldn't even think clearly. He just sat there, feeling the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. By morning, his company's shares had dropped. Investors began pulling out. People who once praised him were now calling him careless and overconfident. Inside his headquarters, the once cheerful atmosphere had turned cold. Employees whispered behind his back. Some were scared. Others were angry. Ethan called an emergency meeting. The room was tense. His top advisors looked exhausted, their faces pale. One of them finally said, "Sir, we've lost almost 70% of the investment already. If Nextech declares bankruptcy, we'll lose the full amount." Ethan closed his eyes. 70%. That was over $200 million gone. He rubbed his forehead, feeling a sharp pain building behind his eyes. "What about our partnership agreements?" he asked quietly. "They're useless now," another advisor replied. "Their legal team vanished. The company's offices are shut down. It's over." The silence that followed was painful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to stay calm, but inside, he was breaking. How could this have happened? How did he, of all people, fall for such a trap? And then, like a haunting echo, he remembered that soft, steady voice. "You might lose everything." Lila, the maid's daughter. She had warned him. He got up and walked to the window, staring at the city skyline. Just days ago, it had looked bright and full of promise. Now it looked cold and distant. He realized that all his success, all his confidence, had blinded him. He had trusted fancy presentations and big promises but ignored simple truth and intuition, the kind that came from honesty, not ego. When the meeting ended, Ethan told everyone to leave him alone. He sat there for hours thinking. The words of his advisors faded in his mind, replaced by guilt. If I had just listened, he thought. If I had stopped for one moment to check instead of feeling insulted. He remembered how Lila had looked that evening. Nervous but brave, standing there with her mother, trying to warn him. He had laughed at her, brushed her off like she didn't matter. And now, her words were the only ones that made sense. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt small. Not because of the money he lost, but because of his pride. He realized that he had surrounded himself with people who only agreed with him, people too afraid to tell him the truth. And when the truth did come, from the most unexpected person, he ignored it. That night, he drove home in silence. The mansion felt empty and lifeless. He walked past the grand staircase, past the gold-framed paintings, and stopped at the window where he could see the city lights. They didn't shine as beautifully as before. He thought of all the years he had spent chasing success, believing that being rich made him right. But now he understood wisdom doesn't come from money, it comes from listening. The next day, the final blow came. Nextech officially declared bankruptcy. Their founders disappeared, leaving investors with nothing. The media called it the biggest corporate scam of the year. Ethan's reputation was in ruins. His company's value dropped drastically, and rumors spread that he might have to sell part of his empire to recover the losses. But more than the financial loss, what hurt Ethan most was the shame. He couldn't stop thinking about Lila. She had seen what his entire team had missed. He remembered the calmness in her tone, the confidence in her eyes, and the honesty in her words. She didn't speak to impress him. She spoke because she cared. He knew what he had to do. That evening, Ethan called Maria to his office. She arrived nervously, not knowing what to expect. "Sir," she said quietly. "Maria," Ethan began, his voice softer than usual. "I need to talk to your daughter." Maria blinked in surprise. "Lila? Did she do something wrong?" "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "She did something right. Something I should have listened to." He sighed. "Can you ask her to come here tomorrow? I owe her an apology." Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'll tell her." After she left, Ethan sat back in his chair. He felt both nervous and relieved. For years, people had come to him for advice, for help, for approval. But now, he was the one seeking wisdom, from a young woman who had dared to tell him the truth. That night, for the first time in weeks, Ethan slept peacefully. Not because his problems were solved, but because he was finally ready to face them with humility. He knew the road ahead would be hard. The media would continue talking, investors would demand answers, and his company would struggle to recover. But deep inside, he felt a small spark of hope, the kind that comes when you finally decide to make things right. Somewhere across the city, Lila sat with her mother, unaware of the change she had set in motion. To her, she was just an ordinary girl who had spoken up once and been ignored. But she didn't know that her few simple words had already started saving a billionaire's empire and teaching him the most important lesson of his life. The next morning, Lila stood nervously outside the grand glass doors of Ethan Grant's office building, the same place where, just weeks ago, she had been scolded for interfering in billionaire business. Now she was being called there again, but this time by Ethan himself. Her mother, Maria, had been surprised when she got the message. "Mr. Grant wants to see you," she had said softly at breakfast. Lila had nearly dropped her spoon. "He wants to see me? Why?" Maria only shrugged. He didn't say, but he looked serious and kind. Now, as Lila entered the building, she could feel dozens of eyes on her. People in suits looked at her curiously. Some recognized her as the maid's daughter. She didn't care, though. Her heart was beating fast, her palms were sweaty, and her mind was full of questions. When she reached the top floor, Ethan's assistant greeted her politely, a big change from before, and led her into the office. Ethan was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. He turned around slowly when she entered. He looked different, tired, older, but also calmer. "Lila," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." She nodded, unsure of what to say. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Yes," Ethan said, motioning for her to sit. "Please have a seat." For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Ethan took a deep breath and then spoke, his voice heavy with sincerity. "Lila, I owe you an apology. A big one." Lila blinked in surprise. "An apology? For what?" "For not listening to you," he said. "You tried to warn me, and I treated you like you didn't matter. I was arrogant and foolish. You were right about Nextech. The company was a scam. Because of my pride, I almost lost everything." Lila stared at him, her eyes wide. She didn't know what to say. The world's most confident billionaire was sitting in front of her, admitting he was wrong. To her, a maid's daughter. Ethan smiled weakly. "I thought I knew everything about money and business. But you saw something I didn't, the truth behind their lies. I should have listened to you that night." "I just said what I felt," Lila said softly. "It didn't make sense that they were growing so fast. It looked fake. Ethan nodded. You have a good eye and a good heart. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That success isn't just about numbers. It's about judgment and honesty. He leaned forward, his tone gentle. Lila, I want to ask you something. Would you like to work with me? Lila's jaw dropped. Work with you? Yes, Ethan said. I need someone who can see what others can't. Someone who's not afraid to speak the truth. I've started rebuilding my company, but this time, I want a team that values honesty over flattery. You'd be perfect for that. Lila was speechless. She had never imagined anything like this. But, I don't have a degree, she said hesitantly. I'm not a business person. Ethan smiled. Neither was I when I started. You'll learn. What matters is your instinct. And you have that. She hesitated, looking at him. Are you sure? He nodded firmly. Absolutely. For the first time, Lila saw something in Ethan's eyes she hadn't seen before, humility. He wasn't the proud billionaire who laughed at her. He was a man who had learned from his mistakes and was ready to change. When Maria heard the news that evening, she couldn't believe it. Her hands trembled as Lila told her everything. He wants you to work for him? My God, Lila. Lila smiled shyly. I don't know if I can do it, Mama. Feels too big for me. Maria hugged her tightly. You deserve it, my child. You've always been brave. You spoke the truth when no one else dared to. Now God is rewarding you. The next few weeks were life-changing for both Lila and Ethan. Lila began working as an assistant analyst in Ethan's company. At first, she was nervous, surrounded by professionals in fancy clothes, using terms she barely understood. But Ethan made sure she felt welcome. He often reminded his team, sometimes the most valuable insights come from fresh eyes. Whenever she made a small observation, Ethan listened carefully. Sometimes her ideas even led to big decisions. Slowly, people in the office began respecting her. Some even came to her for advice. Ethan, meanwhile, began rebuilding his empire with a new mindset. He met with investors personally, made transparent deals, and focused on ethical growth. The media noticed the change and started writing new headlines. Billionaire Ethan Grant's remarkable comeback. But what few people knew was that much of this new strength came from Lila's influence. Her simple honesty had reminded Ethan what real leadership meant. One afternoon, as they reviewed some new proposals, Ethan turned to her and said, You know, Lila, when I lost that $300 million, I thought it was the end. But now I realize it was just the beginning of becoming a better man. Lila smiled. Sometimes losing something big teaches us the biggest lesson. He nodded. You're right. And you've taught me that. Their bond grew, not as boss and employee, but as mentor and student. Ethan encouraged Lila to study finance part-time, promising to cover her education expenses. You have potential, Lila, he said one day. One day, you'll be running your own company. And when that happens, I'll be proud to say I knew you when you were just starting. Lila laughed. I'll hold you to that promise, Mr. Grant. Months passed, and Ethan's company began thriving again. Investors returned, and profits soared. But this time it was different. He didn't chase risky ventures or flashy success. Every decision was made carefully with integrity, and he made sure to include Lila in those decisions. He often told people, the smartest advice I ever received came from someone the world ignored. In private, he sometimes thought about how close he had come to losing everything, not just money, but his values, and how a young woman's courage had saved him. As for Lila, she never let the success change her. She still visited her mother daily, still helped her with chores, and still lived simply. But deep inside, she carried a quiet pride, not for the position she held, but for the difference she made. Because in a world full of wealth and power, it was her truth, not her background, that had made her truly valuable. And Ethan knew it too. Every time he looked at her across the boardroom table, he was reminded of the day a maid's daughter told him the truth he needed to hear, and saved his $300 million empire with just a few honest words. Months had passed since Lila began working with Ethan, and the atmosphere in the company had completely changed. What was once a place filled with pressure and ego had become a space of learning, respect, and new ideas. Ethan's employees were no longer afraid to speak up or share opinions. It was like a new chapter, not only for his business but also for his heart. Ethan often stayed late at the office not because he had to, but because he wanted to build something meaningful this time. He no longer chased headlines or luxury. Instead, he wanted his company to stand for honesty. And in every important decision, Lila was always there, calm, thoughtful, and surprisingly wise for her age. One evening, as the golden light of sunset filled the office, Ethan was reviewing a new business proposal. It was from an international firm that promised huge profits within months. The old Ethan would have signed the deal immediately. But this time, he paused and called out, "Lila, can you take a look at this?" She walked over, holding a notebook, and began reading through the papers carefully. After a few minutes, she looked up. "Something feels off," she said quietly. Ethan smiled slightly. "Off how?" "They're promising too much too fast," she explained. "Their reports look perfect, too perfect. It reminds me of Nextech." Ethan leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "You think it's another trap?" "I can't say for sure," she said. "But maybe you should check their background more deeply before trusting them." Her words hit him like a gentle reminder of the lesson he had learned the hard way. Ethan immediately called his team to investigate. Within 2 days, they found out that the company had been accused of fraud in 2 other countries. Lila had been right again. When Ethan told her the news, she simply smiled and said, "I'm just glad you checked." Ethan chuckled. "No, Lila. I'm glad you spoke." News of Ethan's smarter, more ethical business moves started spreading. People in the industry began calling him the billionaire who listens. His comeback story became a symbol of humility and wisdom. Interviewers asked him about his secret, and he always said the same thing: listening, especially to those you least expect to teach you something. But Lila stayed humble. She didn't like attention. She preferred to work quietly, learning everything she could. Ethan often watched her during meetings, how she took notes carefully, how she asked questions when others stayed silent, how she treated everyone with kindness, no matter their position. One day, Ethan invited her to his private office. On his desk sat a sleek silver laptop and a thick file. "Lila," he said, "do you know what this is?" She looked curious. "No, sir." He smiled. "It's your scholarship. I'm sending you to a business school abroad. Full expenses covered. You've earned it." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? No, I can't accept that." "You can," Ethan said gently. "And you must. You have a gift, Lila. You see what others don't. It's time to sharpen that gift and make something of it." Lila felt her throat tighten. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. "But who will help you if I go?" Ethan laughed softly. "I'll manage. You've already helped me more than you know." For the first time, Lila felt truly seen. Not as a maid's daughter, but as someone capable of greatness. She accepted his offer, promising to study hard and return one day. The day she was leaving, Maria came with her to the airport. Ethan himself came to see her off. He handed her a small leather notebook. "I used this when I started my first company," he said. "Now it's yours. Write your ideas here. Every thought matters." Lila smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Grant, for believing in me." Ethan nodded. "No, Lila. Thank you for saving me." As she walked toward the boarding gate, Ethan watched her go, feeling proud. This young woman had changed his life forever. She had reminded him that true success wasn't about how much money one made, but about how much one learned, grew, and helped others. Months passed again. Lila studied in one of the best business schools in the world. She worked hard, often staying up late reading about finance, ethics, and investments. But more than anything, she wanted to build a business that helped people, not one that only made profits. Back home, Ethan kept in touch with her regularly. Every week, she sent him updates, and he often replied with advice or encouragement. Their bond had become something pure and lasting, a friendship built on respect and gratitude. One day, while checking his emails, Ethan received a message from Lila. It read, "Mr. Grant, today I presented my first business plan, a foundation that supports honest startups run by young people from low-income families. The judges loved it. Couldn't have done it without you." Ethan smiled as he read her words. He leaned back and whispered to himself, "You've come so far, Lila. You were always meant to shine." He decided to invest in her foundation as its first donor. When the foundation was launched, the media covered it widely. Former maid's daughter starts charity for young entrepreneurs, supported by billionaire Ethan Grant. The story melted hearts around the world. Lila returned home a year later. Ethan met her at the airport, clapping proudly as she walked through the crowd. She had grown. More confident, more poised, but still the same kind-hearted girl. "Welcome back, Lila," Ethan said, smiling warmly. "Good to be home," she replied. They stood there, both knowing that their story had come full circle. From a mistake worth $300 million to a friendship worth far more. Ethan had regained his fortune, but more importantly, he had regained his humanity. And Lila? She had found her purpose, to use her voice, her courage, and her wisdom to help others rise, just as she once did. That evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, Ethan looked out from his office window once more. But this time he didn't see wealth or success, he saw hope. The kind that began with a single brave voice. A maid's daughter who dared to tell the truth. And that truth had changed everything. A year later, the story of Ethan Grant and Lila became known far beyond the walls of his company. Newspapers, magazines, and social media all shared it. The maid's daughter who saved a billionaire. But for both Ethan and Lila, it wasn't about fame. It was about change, about what they had learned from each other, and how that lesson kept shaping their lives. Ethan was now a different man. The proud, impatient billionaire who once ignored others had become humble and thoughtful. He had learned to listen before deciding, to value people over profits, and to trust honesty more than sweet words. His company, once shaken by scandal, had become stronger than ever. Investors admired his new leadership style, calling it the human way of business. But Ethan knew deep inside that all the credit didn't belong to him. It belonged to the young woman who had dared to tell him the truth. Lila. Since returning from business school, Lila had launched her own foundation called the Honest Start Initiative. Its mission was simple, to help poor but talented young people start their own small businesses. The foundation offered training, small loans, and mentorship programs. Lila's goal was to give others the chance she never had. A chance to be heard, to be believed, and to rise through hard work and truth. Ethan became her biggest supporter, both financially and emotionally. He attended the opening ceremony of her foundation, standing proudly beside her as she gave her first public speech. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the microphone. The crowd was large, businesspeople, reporters, and young dreamers from poor neighborhoods. She looked at them and said, "When I was younger, no one listened to me because I wasn't rich or powerful. But one man did, and it changed both our lives. So today, I want this foundation to be a place where every voice matters, no matter where it comes from." The crowd clapped loudly, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. He felt proud, not because she mentioned him, but because she had become everything he knew she could be, strong, wise, and kind. As time passed, Lila's foundation began changing lives. Dozens of young people started small businesses with her help, from bakeries to tech startups. Many of them came from families just like hers, where dreams often felt impossible. Lila personally mentored many of them, sharing her story and teaching them how to stay honest in a world that often rewards lies. Ethan often visited her foundation's office. It wasn't fancy like his, no marble floors or gold accents. It was warm, filled with laughter, hope, and the smell of coffee. He loved that place. It reminded him of what success was truly supposed to feel like. One afternoon, Ethan and Lila sat together in her small office, drinking tea. Papers were spread across the desk, reports, donation forms, and letters from people thanking her. Ethan looked around and said, "You know, this little office is more powerful than my entire company." Lila laughed softly. "That's not true, Mr. Grant. You've built something amazing too. He shook his head. No, Lila. I built a business. You built a future. She smiled at him. Maybe we both did, just in different ways. They sat quietly for a moment, looking out the window at the busy city below. For the first time, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. Later that year, Ethan invited Lila and her mother to his mansion for dinner. It was the same mansion where this entire story had started, where a maid's daughter had once dared to speak her truth. But now everything was different. Maria and Lila were not guests from the staff quarters anymore. They were honored guests. The dining table was beautifully set. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and memories. Maria looked around, still finding it hard to believe how life had changed. Mr. Grant, she said softly, I never imagined I'd see my daughter sitting at your table like this. Ethan smiled kindly. Maria, she earned her place here. She's one of the bravest people I've ever met. Lila blushed a little. I just said what I thought was right. And that, Ethan replied, was exactly what I needed to hear. After dinner, they went out into the garden. The night was calm, and the sky was full of stars. Ethan turned to Lila and said quietly, You know, when I first met you, I thought I was helping your mother. But now I realize you helped me. You saved me from myself. Lila looked at him gently. We both helped each other, Mr. Grant. You taught me that no dream is too big if we work honestly. And I think that's what really matters. Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting the garden lights. You're right. I lost $300 million once, but I gained something more valuable. Wisdom, friendship, and purpose. They both stood in silence for a while, listening to the soft wind and the rustling of leaves. It was strange how life had come full circle. From a warning ignored to a lesson learned, from loss to rebirth. Their story had become a symbol of hope for many. Years later, people still talked about them. The humble maid's daughter and the billionaire she saved. Books were written, interviews were recorded, and their story inspired countless others to believe that truth and courage can change the world. But for Lila and Ethan, it was never about fame or attention. It was simply about doing what was right, about staying human in a world that often forgets what that means. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ethan stood on his balcony, holding a cup of coffee. Lila had just sent him a message. Mr. Grant, we just helped our 500th students start their own business today. Thank you for believing in me. Ethan smiled, his heart full. He typed back, No, Lila. Thank you for teaching me that even the smallest voice can save the loudest empire. He put his phone down and looked at the city, the same city that once tested him and broke him. But now he saw it differently. It wasn't just made of buildings and lights anymore. It was made of people, honest, brave, imperfect people just like Lila. And as the stars appeared above, Ethan whispered to himself, Money can build towers, but truth builds legacies. And that was exactly what they had built. Together.